Wonderful. Thank you all for joining us on this afternoon or evening's webinar. My name is Cleveland Justis. I'm the principal and CEO of the Potrero Group, and we're pleased to have you join us. As you likely know, this is recorded here, and you should see a poll. It'd be really helpful if you could complete the poll for us, and that would just give us a little bit of sense of the of who's in the room and what you might be looking for here. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and get us started. I am joined by several colleagues here from Potrero Group, and it looks like there's a robust group of participants here. You are welcome at any point to send us messages in the chat, and if you have questions there, my colleagues will be answering those or passing on those to me, and we will answer those towards the end of the webinar. So the genesis for this afternoon's webinar is really because we've been getting so many calls and emails from people, given the current situation in the government, that are looking to make a career shift. And we thought it would be helpful to compile some resources and give some insights and bring some experts into the conversation to share some of the information in hopes that it would be useful for you. So joined on the webinar that'll be co-leading this with me is my colleague, Stephane Alexandre, who's our lead recruiter at Potrero Group. And hopefully you can see her, depending on your screen configuration. She's our lead recruiter, also the person who screens most of our applications and does our early round interviews. She's going to share some tips and ideas that she has gleaned from years of reviewing applications and applicants. And then Frank Dean is here as well. Frank recently retired from the Yosemite Conservancy as their president and CEO, and after four decades of federal service. So he made his own career switch, and he's going to be sharing his insights later on in the webinar. So thank you both for joining us today. So just to give you a little context here, you've joined a webinar from the Potrero Group. We are a boutique consulting firm that works primarily at the intersection of business, government, and nonprofits, often with environmental groups, land trusts, parks, conservation organizations. We do strategy consulting, executive search, and board search. So a lot of our clients are on the slide that may be a little hard to see, but we work across the nation, and we work in large partnership environments, often where business, government, nonprofits are working together. So we encounter a lot of career switchers and people that are shifting and pivoting their careers. So that's really the insights that we bring this. I also have a background in organizational development and run the executive leadership program at UC Davis. So I'll bring in some of that experience as well. This is going to be a little more us talking at you during the beginning part of this program, actually most of the program, and then but we will intersperse it with some insights from Stephanie and Frank, and then at the end we'll have Q&A, and we're going to cover a fair amount of material in our hour and 10-15 minutes together, and sometimes it'll go a little quickly, and we will be sure to send out a recording and the slides to everybody who's registered. So this is our general flow of where we're heading over this time, and hopefully this is useful for you. If there's anything we can add or help bring to the webinar in real time, feel free to add that into the chat. So we take a particular viewpoint on career pivots that for most people that we see, which are often mid to senior level leaders, it's when they're making a career pivot, it's about transitioning, translating, and building on their skill sets. So we're looking, when people come to us and say, well, I've worked in government and I want to move to a nonprofit sector. I've worked in the corporate sector and I want to move to an environmental organization. We say that often it's around these skills here, which is really translating the skills you already have, reframing those skills, and learning how to speak in other professional languages. I'll talk a little bit more about that. My colleague Daniel and I wrote a book where I'll draw from some of that material as well. But it's really that ability to take all the leadership experience you have one place and make sure the person with whom you're speaking it makes sense to them from their point of view and their frame of reference. And then finally, on the bottom right of the slide are really the skills that we're often looking for when we're screening applications that you want to convince people like Stephanie that you're about, especially if you're making a career pivot, that you're a lifelong learner. We want to hear about the impacts of your work, not just what you did, but how it made a difference. We want to understand that you have some ability to see your own biases and that you may understand how our clients may see you and have biases against you or for you. For instance, if you come from government and you're going to business, they may think that you're not going to be able to move as quickly as business often does, or vice versa. Sometimes people coming from business sectors to our clients in the nonprofit sector, there's a bit of a bias that perhaps they're not going to understand the culture and they're going to move too fast. Also, a lot of people who come from certain sectors have great leadership skills, but our clients are particularly looking for often for fundraising and financial management proficiency. Doesn't mean you need to be an MBA or a CPA, but that you understand how finances work and you understand how fundraising works. Doesn't mean that you necessarily have to be an expert in it, but that you can speak the language of that and that you understand when those questions come up. And we'll talk more about that later in the session. A couple things to know about career pivots. The first is, not surprisingly, if you're in the midst of this, I've been taking a lot of these phone calls lately, it's emotionally exhausting. And there's a wonderful book that's been around for many decades by a man named William Bridges, who wrote a lot about transitions. And he described the stages of a transition, a career pivot, as the first part is really grieving. It's an ending. You're in shock, you're in denial, you're fearful, you're sad, and your productivity is going down. You're really in a place of disruption. And then that continues over time where you're maybe a little less scared, but you're more confused and skeptical. And at a certain point, you hit bottom, and then you start to feel a little more creative and innovative and collaborative. You're exploring. And then as you take the next step and you really are in that new role and you made the pivot, you start to get really excited and committed to the new journey. And his book is wonderful. William Bridges is his name, and highly encourage you to look. It's been around a long time and it's really weathered the test of time. But it's, I think, important to recognize you may be somewhere on this continuum and you may go back and forth. You may go through the cycle many times, and just to recognize that this is really challenging. One of the things we know from career success stories is these 6 elements are incredibly important. I'm not going to go into all of them in detail, but when you're meeting or for an informational interview or for a real interview, first make sure you understand the challenges that industry or that organization is facing. There's so much information out there, but it's amazing how often people are not prepared to speak about the bigger picture that's going on. The second one is that the people who've made good pivot success have taken preemptive steps to manage their own career. They've prepared for the transitions that we know will come and are continuing to come and always will come throughout it. Third one is that they can articulate their strengths effectively, that they really know what they're good at and what they're not good at. Not surprisingly, they're able to manage change. Fifth is they can manage and market themselves effectively. I'm going to talk a little bit about marketing yourself and actually creating a marketing plan for your career pivot. And I'm going to intentionally use some business language because it can be helpful in thinking about this. And finally, they've built an effective network. And you'll notice we didn't say they're effective networkers, because what we're trying to emphasize here is you actually need to build an effective network, which is different from networking. And I'll explain a little bit about that. As I said, um, the career marketing plan is one of the big takeaways from this session. Is as you make a career pivot, is you're going to want to make sure you actually create your own career marketing plan for how you're going to do this and how you're going to market this change um, in your journey. And that plan needs to, like a lot of marketing plans, if you've studied marketing, it needs to be based in your brand and the market, and it should be adaptive. And the brand in this case is you. And the best candidates that we see, and Steph will probably talk about this in her session, they really understand themselves and they understand their strengths and weaknesses. And they've done the work to articulate that and frame those up and potentially continue building on their strengths and adapting to their weaknesses and finding ways to manage through those weaknesses. Another characteristic of effective marketers in general, or career marketers, are that they have a strategy for how they're going to make the pivot. And we'll give you some tips on that. Again, they can articulate their skills, and they also, as importantly as their skills, they know where they need to improve. Recruiters and others, hiring managers, are pretty good at seeing through words on a resume. And so you need to have done the work, not just put in the words, and help us, see that how you're going to improve over time. Another part of this is just starting with your brand. The brand is kind of what you stand for. What is your area that you're focused on? What are you uniquely good at? And it's amazing, Steph and I and Carly, who's on the call, and Daniel, all of us that sit in recruiters, we listen to hundreds, sometimes thousands of interviews a year. And we genuinely love talking to people, but some people really don't convince us that they really understand where they're going and why they're applying for this job. And so the more research that you have done, the better. And you want to make sure that you do everything you can to communicate your brand. Now, we had somebody recently who applied for a job, and her cover letter was a couple sentences long, and she said, well, my resume speaks for itself, which it may, but we actually read every cover letter that comes across, and we're looking for the story that is about you and your brand and how you communicate that brand. And sometimes you can do that. You don't have to follow an entirely traditional approach, but let us know that you understand what our clients are about and that you can help solve their problems. And that often takes a lot of research. These are the 5 elements of the way that you want to think about your own brand in this process. And again, I'm sorry if I'm using overly corporate speak, but I'm doing it intentionally because we have about 40% of the people here are from the government, and sometimes this is not, business speak is not always as comfortable if you come from the government. And yet the board members that you may be talking to, if you're applying for a nonprofit, may come from business. So I'm actually doing this intentionally. It is because it's part of that learning other professional languages. And a business person, especially if you're coming from the nonprofit sector or the government sector, and you're applying to and speaking to a group of private sector leaders, they want to understand that you can speak their language, the language of business, in addition to the language of impact and regulation, which is maybe what you're more accustomed to. So these are the 5 pieces that we would encourage you to build into your understanding of your brand. And we could do a whole seminar on each one of these. So I'm just introducing this. There's a lot on the web here about these topics, and I'm giving you an overview. So there's a lot more. And again, maybe we'll do a follow-up webinar on any of these if you're interested in them. Finally, one of the things that can be really helpful, any good brand understands its position within the market. This is not a real person, but this is a composite of a person. One of our staff members wrote this up about a former park superintendent, maybe that was Frank Dean, who made a career pivot. And so might be a way that a person who had worked in the National Park Service could articulate the skills of being a park superintendent to running and being a CEO of a conservation organization. The point is, you shouldn't ever apologize for your background. You just need to pivot it and put it into a position that people can understand how you're using those skills and how you use in the past and how you'll use them in their organization. So, some people think a park superintendent is just managing wildlife or wearing a hat and going out in the field. Well, the job of a park superintendent is leadership. You are managing budgets. You're often dealing with members of Congress. You're actually fundraising, often not from donors, but from Congress. You don't necessarily use those words. So think about how you can take all the great work that you've accomplished and make it applicable and kind of change your frame of reference for the person that may be listening. Somebody like Stephanie, who listens to a lot of conversations and reads a lot of applications, and she's looking for, yeah, it's great that you've worked for the EPA for a long time, but how does that apply in a much smaller organization that may have very different challenges than a federal agency? So with that, I'm going to pause and I'm going to stop sharing here, and I'm going to invite my colleague, Stephane Alexandre, who's coming to us from Boston, I believe.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you can highlight her, Steph, so we can all see her big, but would love to, if you can highlight there. And Steph is our lead recruiter. She's coming to us, as I said, from Boston. She's phenomenal leader and a phenomenal recruiter for us. And I've asked her to spend a couple of minutes talking about the things that she's looking for and maybe doesn't like to see in written applications and also during interviews. So with that, Steph, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Cleve. Hello, everybody. My name is Steph. I have been with Potrero Group for almost 4 years now. Like he said, I am the recruiter and I do the first screening, 45-minute phone calls with our applicants. I would say over my time here, I've probably reviewed over 1,000 resumes and cover letters, so I see them pretty often. Just wanted to go over some things that catch my attention, some of the best practices that I've seen, and some of the common mistakes, and then we'll go from there. I think as a recruiter, when I look at a resume, something that catches my attention is if you can have like a blurb at the beginning about your core skills and experience. So a lot of people will write a list of like program management, fundraising, budget planning, or forecasting. And that really helps show me the core competencies, the experience that you have, and what you bring to an organization. So another thing that really helps is just clear metrics under your leadership. Did you hire 3 people? Did you reduce, waste in this department? Did you increase fundraising, or did you manage this many grants when you started, but at the end you were able to manage more grants? Anything that gives kind of a metrics feel to your resume helps me pinpoint some of the work that you've done without meeting you yet. Some of the common mistakes is writing too much. Sometimes it's hard to understand the information if it's cluttered or in different fonts or in different areas. I would say definitely when it comes to cover letters, writing the right job title in the cover letter is something that I've run across. And when I read cover letters, the best ones are always, even if it is a winding road, having a storyline of like, what was your impact? What did you do? And what was the result? What did you do for this organization? And what did it result in? And really having that path flow very well to help me understand and help me envision you in this role. So moving on to some of the, one more thing about resumes and cover letters. If you are able to put it in a PDF form to just see how it looks, because how it looks to you is how it looks to me. So if it looks cluttered in a PDF, you can always like go back and make the necessary edits to make it look more presentable, so that all the information that you want to portray is right at the center and very apparent to the recruiter. I love talking to applicants about transferable skills. A lot of people that I talk to have managed staff, and that is a skill that is transferable to every sector, because learning to communicate with people, learning to lead people is very hard and very good work and very important work across many organizations. And if you know your leadership style, what have you learned from it? If you know your communication style, what have you learned from it is another great one. A lot of people in the public-private partnership space, they're moving from the public to the private part of the partnership. So what did you learn from being working with the government and having to give grants to people? How can that help you understand the fundraising side of a friends group, of a conservancy, for example? So, and the format for answering questions we use here and we love is the STAR format. So situation, task, action, and result. So really keeping those in mind, because sometimes we want to tell the recruiter everything, but it's hard to pull out the information that I need to present to the team and the client if sometimes you're rambling or if you're making kind of distracting gestures. I think practicing the situation, task, action, and result format really is helpful to keep things succinct, keep them brief, keep them to the point, and quantifying your results. Another thing that I love hearing in the interviews is demonstrate, don't tell. So, a lot of people love to say that this is the kind of leader that I am. This is how I fundraise. And of course, I know that there are examples from those learnings. Always start with the examples. This one time that thing happened, and that's what I learned from it. This was the situation. This was the problem. And this is how we came towards a result. Really helps me envision someone in the role, and it really helps me understand where they're coming from and how they work with others, whether that is other leaders in the field, how they work with their staff, or how they've worked with other government agencies in that ecosystem. So those are some of the key things that I would like to highlight from being a recruiter and doing those first round interviews. But I will be here to take any questions at the end as well.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much, Steph. And really, you condensed a lot of knowledge into a very short amount of time. So thank you for that great summary. And again, we'll be able to, Steph will be sticking around to answer some questions at the end. I'm going to continue on with a little more high-level content before I pass it over to Frank Dean. And any of you who have followed some of our work know that Daniel, who's on the call, and I co-wrote a book which really focuses on how do organizations lead at this intersection of business, government, nonprofits. And I'm not going to synthesize the book. You can find it on Amazon. You can find it's for free on Spotify. But it really applies also, the principles that we outlined apply to career search and I'll explain. First and foremost is if you've looked at the book and you've read some of what we've written, we talk about building your network, not networking. And I'm a bit of an introvert, so I don't particularly like networking. Some will be surprised by that who know me, but I do enjoy meeting people, but I find large groups of people where I'm supposed to meet a bunch of strangers incredibly intimidating to most people. But really, what we're saying when we say build a network, we're saying be conscious about creating the network that you want to have to reach the career that you're hoping to have. And that's not just about meeting a lot of people in a random room or some networking event. It's about actually consciously constructing visually. And I'll show you an exercise that you can do later on to help you think about that. And that will help you construct the elements of that network. And an important part of network theory, if you've ever studied it in somewhere, read about it, is networks are not just people. They're also places and things and tools. So, and for some people, an element of a network might be actually gaining new skills. So if you say when you're building out your network, you want to become a development director, say at an organization, an element of the network, if you haven't done a lot of fundraising, might be to get a fundraising credential. And so what we're saying here, that actually is very impressive to us, when people have gone out of the way to get extra credentials. It shows your dedication and your commitment to learning. So when we say build your network, it's to be very conscious about, thinking about the places you want to go and what are the gaps in your skill set, the people you know, and potentially the places you could get more of those skills. So these are some of the questions that we are often encouraging people when they talk to us about networking. This is the activity. This is based on my dissertation advisor came up with this. He calls it net storming. His name's Andy Harganon. And we're not going to have time to practice it now, but it really says, first, try to think about your ideal job opportunity and then brainstorm. And LinkedIn makes this really easy these days. How many people that you may know or you might want to know that fit in that category? And then think about other partners, other places. How can they get you to the people that you want to know? How can they help you get the experiences? One of the best experiences someone can add to their network is being on a nonprofit board. If they have never served on a nonprofit board and they want to work with one, particularly people making a pivot from corporate America, is to really understand nonprofit cultures to serve on a board. So who can help you get on the board that you might want? Maybe you're passionate about um, saving animals or working with children in a foreign country. Who can help you get there so you can build credibility in a new space? Because a lot of people talk to us from corporate America and they're tired of working in a big company and they want to pivot to more of a purpose-driven career. And they want to, but they don't really understand the inner workings of how these organizations work. One of the best ways to get it is to work and serve on one of those boards. So this would be a way of expanding and building out your network. And then we encourage you to map out that. I mean, truly, actually, visually put it on a piece of paper, or on your screen if you prefer, or someplace so you can think about, and then think about how many more connections and new connections you can add to that network consciously. And that's probably not going to be a random act. It's probably meaning you're going to have to reach out to people on LinkedIn, reach out to your friends. It's probably not something you're going to get at a conference mixer necessarily. I encourage people to do a lot less of handing out business cards and a lot more time using some of the great tools that we have, particularly LinkedIn, which I think is often underutilized by people as they're trying to make career pivots. This is the basic framework of our book, if you've read it, and I'm not going to go through all of it. I'll just touch on the highlights, but some of the skills that we identify in the book, they usually fit into either think like a system, acting like a network, or leading like a movement. And this is often how you can, as you're building out your network and making your pivot, can help in this transition. And I'll just briefly touch on those skills. Is first of all to think about what is a system that you want to move into. What does that look like? If you've come from the private sector and you're moving into nonprofits, how is that different? Observe the system. Look at what it looks like. Take a step back and say, how is that nonprofit similar? And you can use your skills from the corporate sector to make that shift. And then really listen, tap in your intuition, and begin to reframe how your skills from one sector apply. Don't tell us, you've run a $500 million organization and you're going to be able to fix this nonprofit. That doesn't fly very well, right? Help us understand really, truly, because most nonprofits aren't $500 million enterprises, and that style of leadership doesn't work well. in mission-driven organizations, but help us see what does. Give us a story, as Steph talked about how you have used your skills and how they might work for a client or a potential partner you're trying to work with. The second part of our framework is around acting like a network. You and I've already talked about this a little bit, but here's some of the skills that we identified in the research is really working and leveraging your job search through a networked approach, which I've talked about. There's a lot more to it. One of the big ones I think is number 5 here, which is often understanding hidden power. A lot of people, they want to, get to the top of the organization, or they want to talk and sound really, really smart. They want to talk to the boss. Well, often it's the gatekeepers that really have a lot of the power. I used to work when Frank and I were together. I worked with our lobbyist was Nancy Pelosi's former chief of staff. And when we were walking around DC, as Frank may know, she knew the name of every doorman in DC around Capitol Hill. And she understood that those people literally, and the administrative assistants, controlled her access. And that there was a lot of power in the door people or doormen and the administrative assistants. And they were often just as important as a member of Congress. So just, and when I ran an organization years ago, my administrative assistant had veto power over any new hire because, and she had a lot of power in that. I literally always went with her decision because they knew when they were meeting with me, they were being interviewed. They didn't necessarily know they were being interviewed by her, but how they treated her was how they were going to treat many others in our organization. So, you really understand that power may not be where you think it is. And then finally, move in, take all this work and move in a unified direction. And again, there's a lot more to this, and Daniel and I are always happy to talk about it. And you can listen to it or read it in the book. But one of the biggest things I would say here is number 4 is part of this job in your career hunt is saying no, is to move and choose consciously what you're going to say no to, because as you're moving and making this career pivot, you want to say no to things as much as you say yes to them. I was doing an informational interview with somebody the other day who somebody referred to me, and they had no idea the kind of space that we work in or anything about our clients. They just knew I was a recruiter, and it was a useless conversation for both of us, because they just wanted to talk to a recruiter. Well, it's a waste of my time, it was a waste of their time. So just because somebody said, oh, I know a recruiter, he should talk to you, it wasn't useful. So focus your time and energy on those areas where you want to move, rather than just casting a wide net. We're all about focusing, which often means saying no, and making sure you have the bandwidth to say yes to the right opportunities and the right places. So I'm going to stop talking now, and I'm going to turn over some to Frank Dean, who's going to ground this in a lot more reality than what I've just given, which is more the theory of this. Frank has been a friend and mentor of mine for probably now 20 years. I first met Frank when he was this general superintendent of the Golden Gate National Recreation Area in San Francisco, and he had moved to that position after heading the Centennial Partnerships for the National Park Service. And he literally moved up from a seasonal ranger through law enforcement to running one of the most complicated national parks in an urban area in the world, and then pivoted to move to being the president and CEO of Yosemite Conservancy, and using a very different skill sets to raise money for one of the most highly visible national parks in the world. And I asked Frank to talk for about 10 minutes just to share a little bit about how he took his skills from government service and all the great leadership he had working at the senior levels of the National Park Service and pivoted that to running a large nonprofit. So with that, Frank, please take it away.
Thank you, Cleve. And it's great to be with you all today. For those of you in public service now, I just want to thank you for your great service, and sorry for all the things you're struggling with right now. And for those of you in the private sector, I want to thank you as well, because the nonprofit world appreciates your skills and experience that you might be bringing to this sector. So welcome. I think working in the nonprofit world is very fulfilling. We have similar missions to the public agencies that I worked in. So, we're sort of twins in a way, or in parallel play there, and trying to help each other. So the missions are similar. It's just obviously a different approach to getting the work done. Your skills are really transferable in most cases to, the nonprofit world. So that's a good thing. It's just really a matter of, as Cleve said and Steph said, how do you communicate those skills and market yourself? Think about this. If are you coming from a specialist background, or maybe more of an executive or sort of a managerial role, and then think about where you want to go as you consider potential opportunities. There's different kinds of friends groups and nonprofits that are out there. Obviously, some are more advocacy, and then some are just more financially supportive of a partner, an agency, or a government entity. So they're very different in their culture and in their approach and the way they sort of raise money. So think about that as you start to explore the opportunities out there. Maybe also consider the scale or the size of an organization. There's obviously different sizes, small, medium, and large. I would recommend that you look for a stable and a proven organization, not necessarily a startup or a relatively small one that's sort of always struggling to make payroll. You probably don't want that financial stress, particularly if you're the executive director. So, going with a proven entity is a lot simpler transition, I would say. I also just want to mention some of you probably know this, but you can go on the websites for these organizations. If you dig a little deeper, they don't often highlight it, but they have to list these on their websites. But the IRS Form 990 has a little bit more of a perspective of the work they do. It describes sort of their thematic and programmatic work that they do with the money that they raise. It talks about their budgets and how much money they're bringing in, and also their expenses, including salaries for their more senior staff. So it's kind of a glimpse into the track record and the stability of an organization. So take a look at that if you haven't done that already. As far as skills, it's obviously what you're bringing to the table, but if you're coming from a technical background, like a specialist, that's fine. If you're coming like from EPA or a science person from a corporate world, those skills are very valuable and are appreciated by, depending on the organization. Not all organizations have necessarily a science staff, but some do. Wilderness Society would be one example of that has a pretty deep science crew. If you're a legal person, Earth Justice is full of lawyers. So there's different sort of organizations out there depending on your skills. If you're a leader in a current job that you're in, you may consider trying to make the pivot to lead a nonprofit organization, although that can be a big leap sometimes, but sometimes it can work out. Other skills to consider are the communications that Steph and Cleve talked about, marketing yourself. And that also goes to the cultural fit. The board, the selecting officials that would be looking to hire you will want to sort of get a sense of how ready are you to make this switch to a different culture and a different approach to the kind of work you're doing or they're doing. Working with boards and donors is another element of this work. By law, each nonprofit has a board, and some boards are strong and more hands-on, depends on the size of the organization. If they have a deep staff, the boards tend to be a little bit more corporate and sort of a little more hands-off, just sort of oversight on policy and checking in to make sure that the budgets are fine and that the policies are being met. But working with those people and communicating with them, whether you're the incoming president of an organization, or maybe you're a specialist, you need to be able to communicate and share your work in a way that's meaningful to the audience. So, and particularly donors. Sometimes specialists, in our case at Yosemite, we would bring biologists in for the project the donor funded, and they would explain their work with the wildlife that they were working with. It was very powerful to meet those people directly. And obviously you'd want to make sure that the right person's presenting your case to the donors, but it can, if done well, it can be really rewarding, and it's a great skill to have. Fundraising is another one where it was mentioned earlier, but Cleve alluded to this, but you may be fundraising already to with Congress or writing grants if you're coming from an academic background and you've had to raise money for your research or something like that. So that's all fundraising in different ways, and it's very analogous to the work that nonprofits need to do. Financial acumen was also mentioned, I think, in one of the slides, and that's important too. That's one of the board's biggest thing that they have. This biggest responsibility is obviously financial stability and oversight of the budget, in addition to hiring the president and CEO. Those are the two biggest things the board has to do in their role. Most of the time, boards then sort of back off and let the staff run things, which is the best. But knowing how to read a spreadsheet and making sure that everything's healthy is obviously important to know, and conveying that to the selecting officials. Recruiting, a lot of times the higher level positions aren't always posted widely. The searches are done a little bit more discreetly by groups like the Potrero Group and other search firms. So, but there are ways of finding out what opportunities are out there. You can look on websites, you can network, as Cleve talked about, and also getting the word out that you're interested in making a transition to do a different kind of a job or career. Getting your name out there is helpful to do. Also mentioning joining a board is another way to show that you're interested in this kind of work. It could be a small board in your town that just to show, it also helps you kind of get a sense of the culture of nonprofit work. So I guess in summary, I would say this is very rewarding work. It's very fulfilling. Can be a little bit of an adjustment at first, just like any job change in your current sector. But after the first 6 months or so, usually you can pivot pretty well, because again, the skills and the mission are often somewhat similar to what you might be doing. So and the good thing is that the board and the staff at these nonprofits really appreciate the experience that someone coming in from outside the sector can bring. So you're pretty much warmly welcomed if you do get hired, and it's a pretty good transition with them. So with that, I'll stop, but happy to turn it back over to Cleve and the team.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much, Frank. Really appreciate you joining us. And I think you're going to stay around for some questions at the end. Okay, wonderful. Thank you. And I want to just echo your words of thanks, Frank, to all the folks coming from the government, and it's heartbreaking what's happening right now. So just thank you for the work, and there's really no words that I can say publicly for what's going on, and you just do so much for our country, and we're here to support you any way we can. And I think that's really the spirit in which we offer this webinar, because we want to help people. I'm going to just start to sort of transition to a close so we can make time for questions and answers. This is just a very quick summary of skills, kind of, we call it upskilling, that I've found in my own career pivots that have been helpful, and that I often recommend to people when they're making a change. The first one are what the wonky term for it called stackable certifications or certificates. And it's really just a lot of major universities or community colleges, and they're not often expensive, just offer various certificates or workshops that will give you a certification. Often you can put them together, and then you get some kind of not necessarily a degree, but a certification that says that you're qualified in this area. And you can accumulate these, and they often build on each other, and they're not very expensive. If you're from California, where a number of us are, these can be offered at a community college or community education program for very little money. And they just help build your fluency in other areas of expertise. And I would echo what Frank said, which is to be a lot of people who work in certain sectors are not comfortable in numbers, but that's certainly really important, is that at least you know how to read. If you're going to work in a lot of organizations, that you know how to navigate and read financial statements. And there's so many skills on that you can gain without a lot of money, spending a lot of money or getting a fancy degree. One of the credentials that is not expensive, but is widely regarded, is the certified fundraising professional certification or series of courses. And that's probably the most widely recognized fundraising credential. I mean, the biggest one we like to see is that you've raised a lot of money. But short of that, if you have gone and received that qualification, it signals, at least in the nonprofit sector, that you are building your skills in raising funds. And that's just often important, even if you're not an official fundraiser position. And I would say one of the most in-demand positions in this economy right now are fundraising positions. And the thing that is interesting and that I've noticed about fundraising positions is it's a very learnable skill. And a lot of fundraisers convince you that you have to be an expert in fundraising. You can learn it, especially if you can communicate. I mean, Frank went from being the superintendent of a major national park to the CEO of one of the most effective fundraising organizations in the country. So one could say, boy, those two don't have anything to do with each other, right? One's a superintendent of a park and one's a fundraiser. Well, those skills are entirely applicable, and in superintendents of large national parks often do really great pivoting to leadership positions in support organizations, friends groups they're called in the sector, because they're used to sharing their love for the park. And good fundraising is really about building friends and communicating your passion. I noticed Jenny, a colleague, used to work with Jenny as the call, and we have a couple of colleagues who've gone into fundraising. We met as educators, and if you have an education or an educator or teacher background, that translates very effectively into fundraising. So that and these are in-demand skills, and sometimes people think, oh, I'm just going to be doing something like cold calling and asking people for money. That's not really what fundraising is. It's much more sophisticated and than that. And usually you're only asking people for money who want to give you money. So you're sharing your passion for the work, and then they're likely to give it. But anyway, that certified financial professional series of programs can help you at least convince recruiters that you've had some formal training in it, which is certainly very helpful. Finance courses, it's always impressive when people that come from non-finance backgrounds can speak finance. It's just helpful. And there's a lot of great resources online and courses. MBA or Masters of Public Administration programs are great. They can be expensive though, so that's not available for a lot of people right now. But just know that those can be great ways to show that you're investing in your education and pivoting your skills. I went back for my MBA in my 30s, and I went back for my doctorate in my 40s, and those are great experiences. But sometimes they're more money than people can afford. There are some lower cost ones and part-time programs and online programs that are affordable. Coursera courses are essentially online courses that don't cost a lot of money. Sometimes it's an all-in monthly fee for as many as you want to take, and they can be really helpful for building new skills and learning about new sectors and showing recruiters and folks that you're investing in your pivot. We've talked a fair amount about nonprofit board service. I think that's a great way to learn new perspectives, also learn how to read financial statements and give back to your community. I've been on a number of boards and find it enormously rewarding. And then probably lastly on my list here is to find a really good executive coach. And I made a really significant pivot from the nonprofit sector to academia, and then from academia to the private sector. And my executive coach was instrumental to holding me accountable and helping me grow through that process. I don't think I could have done a lot of what I did without her support. And it doesn't have to be expensive. There are a lot of coaches that are really, really focused on helping career switchers and making themselves available to a lot of people that are going through difficult job transitions right now. And sometimes as people are gaining training, they'll even do it for free for a number of sessions to build their skills towards their credentials. So it just helps. And sometimes you can even coach for one another, because I found it's very helpful when you're going through those stages of the transition I talked about earlier, to have somebody to hold you accountable and support you toward your goals. Because making a career pivot, and I've made 3 or 4 really major ones in my life, it can be lonely and sad, and having some support through that can be really helpful. And there's some great ones out there. Again, this is kind of the summary of what we really talked about. If you kind of forget everything else we talked about in this webinar, these are the kind of key points that I would encourage you to be thinking about as you make this transition. And as I said, we'll be up soon. Fill that in. We do have another webinar coming up. I think I forgot to update the slides, so sorry about that. What I'd like to do, well, first of all, thank you. Here, by the way, I'll just mention, I think, Daniel, can you tell me, maybe you can just announce it, I think, when the next webinar is, and then we'll open it for Q&A.
Absolutely. I think I have to
Oh,
put
sorry.
myself in spotlight here, so hold on. Okay.
Oops, I might have to stop sharing. Yeah, there you go.
So our next webinar, and I'll put this in chat in a minute, is called Strategy in 2025, Using Long-Term Strategy to Navigate Short-Term Instability. So we're really working with some of our favorite lessons from clients who have really held tight to long-term strategy to navigate things, most notably, obviously, COVID and other challenges that have come through and have really pulled through the instability that many of us are feeling now. So it'll be great for you if you're currently in an organizational leadership role, but also great for you, again, if you're looking to be able to talk about organizational leadership and utilize your experiences to do that. And it'll be April 24th at 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific. And I'll drop that into chat as well. And Cleve, oh, Carly's already doing that. Thank you. And Cleve, we do have our first question in chat as well around getting your resume past ATS and any tips on how to do that.
Great, and thanks, Alan. And so that, before I do that, just we'll say I'll put the slides up again, but in a moment, and then before I answer that question. But if you have not joined our LinkedIn, if you haven't followed us on LinkedIn or followed any of our speakers, I would encourage you to do that. So I think if you use this QR code, that will allow you to sign up for the newsletter and to follow Potrero Group. But feel free to follow me personally. I post jobs, not just our jobs, but any jobs. I posted a job, a fundraising job, kind of entry to mid-level job for the Golden Gate National Parks Conservancy today, and I posted another job, and they're not our jobs. They're just jobs that I think would be interesting to people, and do it to service people. So I encourage you to really use LinkedIn there. So okay, question.